Today's program is supported by K2 Integrity. K2 is the premier global risk advisory firm. In an ever changing world filled with uncertainties and risk, K2 helps clients with better insights, better solutions, and better decisions. K2 Integrity. Believe in better. I'm Yaya Jata Fanusie. The Center for Advanced Defense Studies, it's also known as C4ADS. I'm sure that most of you have never even heard of it. C4ADS is a nonprofit that works to uncover illicit networks that threaten global peace and security. They do this rather quietly through deep dive investigations and intelligence analysis on data that may be publicly available but hard to find. For example, through their investigative work, they've been able to map out secret business and real estate networks designed by corrupt military leaders in Sudan and unravel the multi-layered supply chain enabling forced labor camps of Uyghurs in China, supply chains that often have links to U.S. products you have on your shelf. Varun Vira is the Executive Director of C4ADS, where he started as an analyst a decade ago. We spoke about his time partaking in investigations on the ground internationally and how today his nimble organization is at the forefront of using open source intelligence to shine the light on global networks trying to keep their dealings of dirty money and illicit operations in the dark. It's time to get designated with Varun Vira on the Illicit Edge Network. I want to start with the organization that you're with, C4ADS.
Yeah.
Tell us, what does C4ADS do and how do you do it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So C4ADS, or the Center for Advanced Defense Studies, we're a nonprofit organization with a mission to defeat transnational illicit networks. Now, that's obviously quite a mouthful. So, in simpler terms, we as an organization, we go after bad guys. We go after bad guys, we go after their networks, and those bad guys include everything from wildlife traffickers to North Korean nuclear smugglers to arms merchants in Africa to opioid traffickers in Central America. And so we do this in three core ways. We produce cutting edge analysis that can be used for things like sanctions, seizures, other enforcement actions. We work across the public, private, and civil sectors. We bring them together for actions and for campaigns that are more powerful than what each of them could do independently. And finally, by providing the concept, by equipping others, we also kind of prove that in today's interconnected world, small supercharged organizations can create really tangible real world impact outside and beyond the government focused model. So that's what we do.
So you produce reports, you do investigations. You know, who would you be using these for? Who would be using them? Not you don't have to name names, but the type of audience.
So, I mean, it's what I said. I think a lot of our work is very broadly kind of applicable in different ways. So, the core, we're kind of producing evidence, right, of different issues. So, we have government actors. So, that's the public sector. So, government actors in the United States, in our allied friends and countries who are using this often for enforcement, but also for policy. We have the private sector. So everything from, we particularly focus around logistics that the bad guys need. So systems of finance, transport, communications, trade. So banks, insurance companies, others, they find the data very useful for de-risking, for screening, for compliance. And then the civil sector, civil society, media, academia, others are often using the data, partnering with us in different ways to either go after issues they're interested in, to build their own capacity to be able to do these things, or to have the data and the evidence to kind of support a lot of the evidence and policy and legislative work that they're trying to do.
So then, what really sets you all apart from a government agency, government actor, or for even academia? What do you all do or have that is different?
Yeah. Um, I think it's three things, right? Like, first and foremost, we have a mission. We're a nonprofit organization with a mission. So, where, say, the private sector is kind of profit driven, where the government sector is driven by like the needs of today, we have a mission. So we're laser focused in trying to detect and defeat these networks that are causing global harm. So that's sort of one piece. I think the second piece is our access. We have really powerful partnerships, again, across those sectors I was talking about. But I think most importantly, we have this unique ability where we can work across them. I think a lot of people work in sort of the silos, can work with government, or the work government can work within government. We're able to work across all of them to bring these government, private sectors, civil society communities kind of together for sort of impact. And then finally, I think it's our innovation. Being a nonprofit, being unchained from some of these things, we have the ability and we do our best to try to bring together the best people with the best data, with the best technology. And then I think most importantly, like unchain them to be able to innovate, to be able to experiment, to be able to find new ways of doing things and create unique impact. So I think those are maybe the three things that kind of distinguish us is our mission, our access, and our innovation.
So, what about your role? So, you're executive director, of an organization that, again, I mean, is doing a lot of great things. But what's your origin story in terms of your career and how you ended up leading the organization?
I think more than anything else is luck. I think I've been really lucky to be kind of in the right place at the right time, to be able to find something I'm extremely passionate about, and that kind of builds upon some of the things that I've learned that have kind of shaped my philosophy, right? So I think the first and foremost is I grew up kind of moving around the world. So my dad was a banker, so we jumped around the world every few years. So I always knew I wanted to do something with global impact. I think second, just like all of us, I came up through sort of the standard academia world. I learned what every student of international relations kind of learns, right? What I now see as a bit of that old state centric, like pre data kind of world of way of seeing the world.
Hmm.
And then finally, like I worked in a few other places. I experienced that standard, what I'd call like a DC reward pyramid, where you kind of have to grow to become this senior graybeard before anybody takes your ideas kind of seriously, right?
Mm,
So with all of that, I found C4ADS 10 years ago. It was a really small organization of like 5 or 6 people. And I think over the years, more than anything else, it's given me a platform. It's given me like a platform to build. So I started as an analyst, kind of came up through the ranks. I've done almost every role in the organization, to executive director today. But throughout, I think in each of those roles, because I've kind of grown with the organization has grown with me, it's given me a platform to, I think, build around those three sort of principles, right? Like, I think we're doing something that has global impact. I think we're doing something that hopefully modernizes kind of what's possible with our national security, with our foreign policy. And I think kind of personally important for me, I think gives me a platform to try to build a workplace where talented young people can come in, have opportunities, create impact from day one. um, that's kind of the story. That's where we kind of are, and I think there's a lot more story to tell. I think we're at a really an exciting point with the organization,
mm.
where I think we're growing rapidly, and I think we're going to continue to do so for a little while, and that's really exciting.
So, I mean, as executive director who was once an analyst, I mean, you know what it's like to be on the ground, to be actually, I guess, collecting data. Can you bring us back to before you were, the executive director, when you were someone on the ground? Walk us through something that you did, maybe overseas, where you had to be the person getting the data
Yeah.
that others used.
So, I mean, I think the world has also changed over the last 10 years, right? Like a lot of the data sets that weren't as easily accessible back then are now increasingly available. But I think one of the joys of being at C4ADS is that chance to kind of travel, to meet partners around the world, to kind of work with them to find ways to, find new data sets, find new solutions for the problems you kind of want to go after together. So the one I remember is we done some work on mass atrocities in South Sudan. So one of these countries that just has terrible, terrible civil wars, like millions of deaths. And we were really looking to understand kind of the war economy behind some of these. So how the generals are kind of profiting from the wars. So a lot of that that money, that wealth is held outside South Sudan, places like Kenya and places like Uganda and places like Ethiopia.
Hmm.
So when I was an analyst kind of working this, a lot of that was kind of going to these countries, sitting down with local journalists, with local activists, with local just informed members of the population, and quite literally going around, right? Like I remember sitting around with like taxi drivers and like driving from like house to house to house to like document, to take the photos, to document the house, to then go to the corporate registrar and to go to the land registrar and pull the records ourselves and all of that.
Of
Um,
who? The houses of who? Then
the
registries of who?
generals, the generals. So you had these South Sudanese generals who would kind of earn in the country, right? They're like looting, they're pillaging, they're whatever, corrupt contracts, whatever sort of else they're earning in South Sudan. Then they take the money to say, an upscale neighborhood in Nairobi, and they're buying like the nicest houses, they're buying the nicest cars, they're buying, um, all of the good stuff basically. But that's outside the country. So it requires kind of documenting all of that to firstly find, where these houses are that they've kind of bought, to document that they are in fact the owners of these houses, and then to kind of present that in a way where both the South Sudanese population as well as everybody trying to make change um, can see this evidence, can use it. That's really the goal of what we're trying to do, right? Like we're trying to provide the hard evidence that is not easily available otherwise, on which others can kind of build.
Hmm. So then walk us through an investigation. I mean, if you go to the C4ADS site, there's so many reports that you all have done over the years. I've used the data that you've used, that you all have put together in your analysis in some of my later work. But give us an example or two of an investigation where you all had to do this collection and analysis and what the impact was.
Yeah. Let's think. I mean, maybe we'll pick a report from a couple of years ago called Breaking the Bank. So that was a report on Sudan. I was talking about South Sudan. This is Sudan. And again, kind of similar dynamics. So, like when we're thinking about what we wanted to do there, so firstly, since 2019 in Sudan, again, one of the world's most violent conflicts is playing out. There's kind of genocide happening again in Darfur. There's famine kind of sweeping across the country, and there's almost total state collapse. Quite literally, there's been, heavy battles, heavy fighting in the capital in Khartoum, where buildings like the central bank, all of that are in like literal collapse. But I think what's important when people kind of look at issues like this and say, oh, what can we kind of do? Is that firstly, it wasn't always the case. There was like this brief period between 2019 and 2023 where there was like a huge amount of hope. I got to travel to Sudan a bunch of times. There was a huge amount of hope that there was an actual pathway out of dictatorship, out of all of that, towards like a democratic civilian led government that represented the whole country. And so then in 2023, it like all collapses. There's a coup that leads to like full out war between basically the country's two armies, the Sudan Armed Forces and this is paramilitary army called the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. They go to full out war with each other. And what I'm talking about happens: genocide, famine, all of that.
Hmm.
But I think what was important is from our perspective, like the reason why it all collapsed, the reason why all of this happened is because of a fight for power. And ultimately, it was a fight for money. It was a fight for the control of the levers of the country that generate the money that consolidates the power, right? So, in this report, which came right after the coup, that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to really expose kind of the heart of the conflict, the reason for why all these hundreds of thousands of deaths are happening, explain that sort of through the money, and hopefully through that process also share the data that would enable people in the government and elsewhere to kind of pressure the key players to hopefully end the conflict. So that's what we're trying to do with that report.
And so you have this going on. When you all start on this investigation, what did your team do? What did the analysts seek, and what did they collect?
Yeah. So again, when we're focused on evidence, right, as an organization, we're nonpartisan, we're data driven, we're focused on evidence. And evidence often means like getting the unique data that tells that sort of story. So in this case, and again, this report was kind of the continuation of some work that we've been doing. So it was right after the coup. a lot of the data that we got for this came through our partnerships. So the first thing we wanted was the data. The first place we relied on was our partners. We've been working on Sudan for quite a while, as I was saying, particularly in that period of hope. And so we've done a lot of work with the civilian government, with local activists, with all those organizations. And so through those partnerships, we'd been given access to pretty unique data. So in particular, we had all of the records that were held by the Ministry of Finance and by what was called the Regime Dismantlement Committee, this kind of like special financial investigation sort of unit that was set up to like dismantle the old dictatorship and create democratic institutions. So we had all of the records held by them on all of the state-owned enterprises in Sudan. And these are the companies that are really at the heart of the economy. Sudan's been like a state-controlled economy for a long time. So these are the companies at like the heart. This is where the money is. This is what that power we're talking about is sort of concentrated. So those were the records. That's where we kind of started. That's the core of what we use for the analysis. But again, just to that point you were kind of making earlier, right? These like static snapshots of stories. Even today, like we're regularly working with a lot of these partners in the ground, like a lot of Sudan's like institutions, a lot of their heritage, a lot of their history is quite literally right now being held on like little hard drives that are being like shuffled around the country. So we as C4ADS, we're trying to play a role to help kind of preserve that data, preserve those institutions, and where relevant, kind of use it to explain how the system is working and create the structures, hopefully, that can strengthen. And I believe there will be a democracy to come. I truly believe that. So we're also setting up for that future, you know?
So when you're helping people understand, how the system works, you're also, I guess connecting the dots, right? To use that phrase, because people don't really know, okay, well, where does the money come from and how do they hold it? How do they hide it? So, what sort of connections did you find that would, sort of enlighten the person who doesn't know much about Sudan?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple different ways to answer that question, right? Like one is like what did we uncover and what's sort of interesting, and the other is like the kind of like the methodological, the technical way we sort of went about it, right? Like I'll answer maybe the what we found, and if it's interesting, we can get into like how we kind of did it. But on like the what we found, so firstly at like the highest level, as we kind of mapped out these state-owned enterprises I'm talking about, like who they are, what their subsidiaries are, who owns them, what the like shareholding structures behind them are, which is by the way data that nobody knows. These giant companies that own all of the economy, nobody knows who actually are the companies and the people sort of behind them. So at the highest level, what we kind of uncovered is we built, I think, one of the most detailed public maps of how that economy works, who the people are sort of behind it, and therefore, kind of for today's context, who the key players in the conflict are and what they're sort of fighting over.
Varun, can I just step in to ask though, if this info is not known, so no one knows, so then how do you figure out who's behind these companies?
Well, maybe I should be more precise. Like very few people have known, right? Like that was kind of the point. Like we had access to these partnerships, so we were given access to these records that quite literally, I mean, I went to Sudan, I went to these places where these records used to be held. They're like literally like dusty old like warehouses and rooms that like nobody has kind of gone into for years, but they've been like heavily controlled, right? Like if we kind of pivot back to that example I was using for South Sudan, like the corporate registry of the country in South Sudan, which by the way in the United States is like the DMV. You go down, you get a ticket, you go in line,
Hmm.
is protected by the intelligence ministry. And it's
Hmm.
protected by the intelligence ministry because they understand what this information holds, like what it would mean to the people and like what risks it would present to their dictatorship back in the day, coming back to Sudan.
So it's like if the DMV was run by the CIA,
I mean, it's quite literally in South Sudan. It is quite literally the DMV is run by the CIA.
right, of Sudan.
Uh, in that case,
We
South
need to
Sudan, but
clarify.
yeah, yeah,
Just want to clarify
yeah.
in case someone takes the clip that where we say the DMV is run by the CIA. We don't want any misinformation. But I'm so yeah. So you all would be able to uncover this, get those documents, and build a map, and then what do you do with that?
So, I mean, there's a lot that you can do with that, right? Like coming back to what I was kind of talking about before. I mean, again, we like to think of we like zoom back out, right? To like that kind of framework I was talking about. The evidence we create can be used by the public sector, so governments, it can be used by the private sector, so banks, insurance companies, all of those, and it can be used by the civil sector, media, academia, activism, all of that. And they all use it in sort of different ways, right? So in Sudan, for example, a lot of this work was used by like policymakers working in the U.S., working in the EU, to understand, where aid should go, how they should conduct their diplomatic negotiations, what types of policies they should create. For the private sector, it was a lot of like, here, finally, it's nice people tell us we have to comply with sanctions, we have to comply with sort of regulations, but nobody ever gives us that data. They leave it to us to do this very complex investigation. So here's actually a map of like several hundred, I think a few thousand sort of companies in this case, that you can actually screen for, that you can de-risk. You can make sure as a bank, as an insurance company, you're not banking those companies, you're not insuring those companies, whatever else. And then for the civil society, and again, I think local civil society in this case is kind of the most important for the Sudanese people, right? The glimmer of hope I was talking about, 2019 to 2023, it started on the backs of like I forget the exact dates, but like a 20-year dictatorship. I think it's like 1989, whatever that is. So like a 20 plus year dictatorship, and it broke because of a revolution led by the youth, led by the people, who basically kind of said enough is enough, right? And to kind of galvanize that action, you need information. You need to know um, how people are corrupting your country, corrupting your society, corrupting your community to bring sort of people together. So I think some of the best impact from this report was, a lot of the sort of civil society groups in Sudan that we respect, a lot of the media organizations in Sudan that are working in like extreme conditions, they seem to find it extremely valuable. They amplified it, they used it quite a lot.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's huge. So that's the type of impact it had.
Hmm. Well, let's talk a little bit about another part of the world. On this show, we've talked a little bit about China, but we haven't really done much of a deep dive. And I noticed one of your reports. I think it was called "Long Shadows," and I found that interesting. Could you tell us what problem were you trying to solve with this
Yeah.
case, and explain it a little bit?
Yeah, so again, like Sudan, I think it's kind of useful to just zoom out for a second, right? Because we go pretty deep into some of these issues. So, firstly, the Chinese Communist Party in China has conducted what is one of the largest mass imprisonment, largest repression campaigns against the Uyghur population in Xinjiang, in the 21st century. It's probably one of the most serious crimes against humanity and one of the most like scaled crimes of humanity that we've seen in the last, few decades. Um, they did this specifically in Xinjiang against the Uyghurs by not just like brute force or the power of a gun, like repressing people, but they created like a whole repression economy. They created a whole economy of factories staffed by forced laborers, um, taken from these prison camps, from these detention sites, that were producing raw materials, goods such as cotton, tomatoes, other products that are then sold around the world, contributing to the Chinese economy, using an entire population that's been imprisoned on the basis of their ethnicity and kind of marshaled towards this sort of work, right? So that's the problem we were trying to solve. And if you take it out a step on, how it matters for all of us sitting here in DC or in America, I mean, quite literally, at the end of some of these investigations, we found like tomato paste. The tomato paste you're putting in your pasta from Whole Foods in their grocery aisles that was tracing back to the suppliers, to the factories that were using this forced labor. So now there's a lot of regulation, there's a lot of like attention on this issue. But again, like everything we're kind of dealing with, the problem is always the data. People want to do something about it, but who are the companies? Who are these suppliers? Who are these people? That's the problem we're trying to solve.
So when you had an analyst who was looking at this, right, they're starting with, hey, there's this whole machine going on, but I can't see in it, right? I don't know all the business connections. So walk us through what that analyst had to do. What was their step by step to then map this all out.
Yeah. Again, kind of tying back to something I said earlier, I think that's one of the cool things about C4ADS, right? Like we allow people to find their own paths to these investigations. We encourage kind of new innovative techniques to go about this. So maybe actually we can pivot back in a little bit, but kind of the methodologies that we used on this investigation are actually very different from what we did for like that Sudan work I was talking about, for example, right? So on this one, it was more of like a big data type of investigation. We were using a lot of our access to like Chinese corporate records. We were using some of these intelligence tools like Palantir to kind of create, again, the same thing at the end, a map of these companies, tracing out, all the key players in this repression economy. But we did it in sort of a different way. So for this Long Shadows report, we started with what's called like the XPCC, the Xinjiang, I think it's Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps, which is a now sanctioned but state-owned, quasi-military, quasi-civilian entity that is essentially at the heart. It organizes a lot of these repression activities I was talking about. Everything from the forced labor to the education programs to the prison systems themselves. But also, the XPCC is a very significant commercial entity in its own right. It's like, like the Unilever of China in a way. So to kind of map out this giant sort of enterprise, we kind of began with the XPCC's first layer, their 32 like top subsidiary entities. So we took those 32 entities, and then we took all these Chinese corporate records that we have, all these other records that we have, and we identified every single company in which these 32 companies had more than a 50% ownership stake in, so a majority stake in.
Mm-hmm.
And then we kind of rinsed and repeated. We took all of those companies that those 32 had a 50% stake in, and we identified kind of downstream all other companies that they owned that they had more of a 50% or more sort of stake in. So essentially, we're kind of building out downstream this chain of all the companies that the XPCC beneficially controlled, either directly or indirectly. And that took us from this one XBCC at the top, these 32 companies right below it. It took us to 2,873 companies. And so then when we had this sort of map, we then kind of took those 2,800 companies and we kind of merged and matched them against different types of records. So all the trade records, so bills of lading from global shipping companies that we have access to map out kind of all the trade networks for each of these companies. So not just who owns them, but now who all are they supplying to? Who all are they trading with? And so as we kind of did that, we were able to kind of build out not just, like a network, but we were able to kind of map out that entire sort of system, right? And so as we're doing that, we're finding, a whole range of American companies, just like I was talking about Whole Foods earlier, right? We're finding American companies, we're finding European companies, we're finding Japanese companies, all these companies that are kind of sourcing products, most of them unwittingly, maybe some of them wittingly, but most of them unwittingly sourcing products from this company that is at the heart of like the prison labor system in Xinjiang. And by the way, just, last sort of point here is that's not uncommon. We've been doing the Xinjiang work for quite a while. This Long Shadows report is just one of, a lot of work that we've kind of done on the issue. So a few months ago, we released a companion report that was really focused on the pharmaceutical industry in Xinjiang, because Xinjiang is actually a very significant supplier of all of the pharmaceutical ingredients and products that go into like medicine that we use. And for this report, we had so many exposed, American, European companies that we had quite literally just 2 full pages in the report that is nothing but just like tiny logos of those companies, just to give you a sense of how many. And these are big multinational companies, big suppliers that you probably know the names of, that are kind of exposed to these systems.
Mm-hmm.
So it just gives you a sense of not only is like, the amount of damage that's being done kind of on the ground to imprison like millions of people and put them to kind of work in ways that obviously they don't want to. But also the ways that labor, that forced labor, connects to just all the things you're using, the medicine you're using, the tomato paste you're using, the cotton that's in your t-shirt. All of these things you are unwittingly supporting this repression system that China is using.
Today's program is supported by K2 Integrity, the premier global risk advisory firm. In today's world, threats can arise anywhere at any time. Threats to your organization's operations, financial stability, or reputation. K2 offers a better way to counter the threats facing your organization and provides critical intelligence and actionable strategies to uncover the truth, make decisions, and reduce risk. K2 helps you face critical challenges with an experienced team and the ability to navigate the most complex issues to arrive at better outcomes. That's why clients partner with K2 to help them thrive in an ever changing world filled with uncertainties and risk. By providing better insights, better solutions, and better decisions, K2 Integrity. Believe in better. Varun, I don't want you to necessarily give away the secret sauce,
Yeah.
right? In terms of how you do all of this, but you mentioned so much about data. I'm sure there's countless. There's just so many data points. What sort of technology allows you to go from that top layer to this very detailed map?
Yeah. So again, I think this is some of the joy of working at C4ADS because like innovation is kind of at the heart of what we're doing, right? So we have a whole bunch of different ways we can kind of connect to new data sets, to emerging technology as it kind of emerges. So we have our own in-house teams. We have data engineers that are kind of data engineers, data scientists that are embedded with the analytical teams. A lot of synergy, a lot of value in those two kind of coming together. We have our own in-house software engineering team, so we kind of build things that we can't get on the market. But that ties to the other side, right? Like because of what we do, we also have the ability to acquire in the market, just like anybody else is able to do. We can access the same data sets that are available for free. We can source our own data directly, but also we have partnerships. We work with a lot of really great emerging technology companies, Palantir, Planet, Windward, um, lots of these others, these great companies that are providing great sort of solutions that we're able to kind of bring into our stack, right? And that kind of ties back to if I was talking about like that Sudan example, right? A lot of what we use, the data that I'm talking about, sounds very clean, sounds very easy, but a lot of it was like paper, paper documents in handwriting in Arabic. How do you kind of extract this and kind of use it at scale, right? So for that, a lot of the work we were doing in Sudan, we're doing things like we're collecting, these paper records, but we're OCRing them. We're digitizing these records with technology. Then we're
OCR,
doing OCR,
yeah,
um,
optimal. I'm sorry,
character
optimal
recognition.
character recognition. Yep,
Yeah,
yep,
I think that's it.
yeah.
But then
Optim-
we're using things like NLP, natural language processing, to
hmm.
kind of do like and to do like bulk translation, or to use like entity extraction tools to kind of pull out that data from the paper into CSVs and Excel sheets that we can kind of use easier. So I think the core of this, and again, technology is constantly changing. We're also thinking kind of for the future. All of this will evolve as it kind of goes forward, but we're kind of applying the technology solution to the problem rather than trying to fit problems to technology solutions, right? So that's how we think about it.
So when you do these reports, I mean, you just talked about how you're uncovering networks that some people don't want you to uncover. How did the people you're reporting about respond?
Yeah. So I mean, you're how do I sort of answer this? So I mean, at the highest level, look, there's always cost of free speech, right? So we shouldn't be surprised. But we have faced like the full gamut of risks. We faced everything from lawsuits, companies associated with like Putin's oligarchs, for example, their companies trying to sue us in U.S. court to stop our publications, to stifle our free speech. We faced, cyber intrusion attempts. We faced even attempts at like physical intimidation, all of that. So we're not going to, speak to our specific processes, but I think we're very fortunate. We have a very strong network of experts, of partners inside and outside the government that we're able to kind of work with to mitigate these risks, to kind of keep ourselves safe. And that's included everything for long shadows, for example, um, or some of the work that we've done where foreign governments have taken sort of notice of some of the work that we're doing. But again, all of this, I think it's important to say, as much as I can kind of talk about C4ADS, I think in context, we have it really easy compared to a lot of other people in our field. Like C4ADS has the resources, we have the network, we have the partnerships to protect ourselves. But for a lot of others that we work with, our partners on the ground, the investigative media organizations that do a lot of this type of work, we're talking about Sudan, the organizations on the ground in places like Darfur,
Hmm.
there's just nowhere near the same level of protection, right? So from everything from like legislation to protect journalists to like the tools and technologies that the private sector is building that can be adapted to protect at-risk communities, I think there's like a huge amount to be done, because I think our sector adds an enormous amount of impact, but it's not protected the same way the government sector or the private sector is protected.
Hmm. Um, have you ever had a government target individuals through their sort of um, legal or economic power?
Yeah, so we've had a former analyst to work with us who's been sanctioned by the Chinese government, for example, um, and completely frivolous. But these are the types of things, you can't control the actions of others. Again, pivoting to other organizations, there are folks like Bellingcat, for example, that are doing great work in like the open source investigations field. They have quite literally, I think, for one of their directors, Russian intelligence agents kind of showed up at their doorstep or showed up at their parents' doorstep in places like that. So there's a lot of, again, there can be a lot of risks that comes with it. We're very fortunate to live in a country where this speech is protected, where we have the advantages of, a strong legal and judicial system. But again, a lot of our partners don't. And even here in the United States, there are a lot of gaps that allow foreign adversaries um, to come after, not our activities necessarily, but to come after communities in which
Hmm.
we kind of work. Um, and examples of that, again, we're privileged to be in America, where it's stronger than a lot of other places. But
Yeah.
for example, there's a reason why the United Kingdom, our great friends and allies, are the kind of legal jurisdiction of choice for a lot of oligarchs to sue, to try to stifle free speech, to bring cases forward, because their defamation protections, laws like we have here in the U.S., what's called like the SLAPP statute, are not available in these other places. So our adversaries are also learning how to use these systems against us. The Chinese government is getting pretty notorious for not just using intimidation abroad, but also using tools like lawfare to go after actors that it doesn't like. And I
Mm.
think we as a government, we as a community have to strengthen, I think, what makes our country great, right? To strengthen those free speech protections, to strengthen those protections for those defenders. Otherwise, I mean, this is the cost.
Varun, just thinking about the protections we do have and the ability to do this work here in the United States, how have how have, let's say, changing administrations over time, because you've been, C4ADS has been around for a decade plus. Um, how have you been affected by different administrations?
Yeah. Um, I think the honest answer is not that much. And I think it's because of a couple of reasons. I mean, firstly, C4ADS as an organization, we're nonpartisan, right? So we're quite literally, we're eager, we're keen to work with whoever the American people kind of chooses to represent them, right? So I've been through multiple different administration changes in both sides of kind of the aisle. But I think more importantly, forget the organization. I think the issues that we tackle are truly nonpartisan. I think regardless whether you're on this side or that side, I think all of us care about some of the issues that we tackle, right? Like the fentanyl epidemic, the role of the cartels, the role of Chinese suppliers in the fentanyl epidemic, the opioid epidemic in the United States. We all care about that. Growing Chinese military cyber power and how it's using the economy and lawfare and things like this to intimidate the global system. We all care about this. And even issues such as wildlife trafficking, you know I think, at least from what I've seen, both parties have shown interest in stopping these issues because we recognize This is a threat to our way of life, the global peace and security that we're trying to sort of build. So I think the bottom line is C4ADS will work with whoever is trying to make positive change in kind of the world. We have an advantage in that we work across these different sectors. We're not dependent on the government. We're not dependent on the private sector. We're not dependent on civil society. We can work across all of them. We want to work across all of them. Um, but change creates opportunity. So we'll kind of see how a lot of this sort of unfolds. But I really hope, I truly hope, on a
Hmm.
lot of the issues that we're working with, there will be a lot of continuity, because I think it's good for America, it's good for the world.
And I like your approach. And it echoes my thoughts that countering illicit finance never should be partisan. All right, it shouldn't be partisan. Everyone wants to stop it, so it should not be. If it becomes partisan, there's something wrong, right?
Exactly. Oh, exactly.
Um, I do want to touch on one just technological question, which
Yeah.
is on my mind. Maybe you've talked about it before, but AI. I mean, you
Yeah.
all deal with data,
Yeah.
so how is AI changing your work?
Yeah. So even before I kind of come to AI, right? Like tech innovation more broadly, that's really at the core of what we do, right? Like we were birthed at this sort of like this frontier of open data, of emerging technologies. That's almost in not almost that is in our mission statement, using emerging technologies, using open data to defeat transnational illicit networks. So tech innovation, data innovation is very much kind of at our core. So I have like a couple of thoughts sort of around this, right? Like the first is like your data, your tech, your stack, sort of call it, has to kind of evolve and grow with your needs, right? So again, I think I said it sort of before, but our philosophy in technology is you build around kind of the need. You build around the problem. You don't try to fit the problem to the technology, right? So technologies will come, technologies will go, data sets will open, data sets will close. You have to think about sort of the problem and the tech stack that you are growing to address those sort of problems. So we like to kind of onboard new technology, offboard new technology as sort of needs sort of emerge. And then secondly, I think kind of related to what I was saying there is we think it's extremely important to this term, right? Like keeping the human in the loop, to
Mhm.
build around your people, to build around your analysts, not to build around technologies. So again, it comes back to, for us, what will help the analyst be supercharged to make great analysis, to make great decisions. Because I mean, coming back to AI in a second, like I believe technology is a great thing. I think it can really supercharge what we are all able to do, what we as humans are able to do. But I don't think technology alone is a solution. I think it's really about like technology will never, at least in our field, and you don't want it to make, life or death decisions, to make decisions around who is guilty and who is not. You don't want Minority Report, right? So you
Mhm.
need kind of humans in the loop to make those decisions, to interpret the data, to harness and steer and guide the technology towards sort of the problem that you're trying to address. And so AI, I think, fits within that sort of understanding. I think it's really cool. I think it can do a lot of things really well, but there's also a lot of things it can't do well, certainly not yet. So we are trying to incorporate it in a whole bunch of places. Where can you improve our writing? Where can it automate kind of rote investigative processes that take up a lot of analytical time?
Mhm.
Where can it help us kind of extract data better or process data sort of better? But we're not trying, at least right now, with where the technology is, we're not trying to put it in a position where it's making decisions that we think humans should be making. It can bring them to that point sort of quicker. Um, but we keep our humans in the loop, and we think that's a core piece of what makes our capability powerful and what makes it rigorous and what makes it um, impactful.
I love that idea, keeping humans in the loop, and very happy to hear that there's no Skynet behind one of those consoles that you all are working on. So that's great news. Um, I just want to ask, maybe before you leave, since you all investigate so many things, can you share with us maybe an issue that you think deserves more investigation, something that you're really interested in looking into more?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a really hard question too, probably the hardest one you've asked because I mean every day I get like so many great ideas kind of coming up from our analysts that I think are important issues that need attention that we can do a lot sort of about. So sorry, I'm not going to give you one. I'll give you three, and that's I think the best I can do right now. There's three that I'm like really interested in right now that I think are important for a variety of different reasons. Like one is what they call like critical minerals or strategic minerals, those supply chains. I think that's kind of like the frontier for some of this great power competition that's kind of happening right now. So that's actually a really good question. It depends because again, there's a whole bunch of critical minerals, there's a whole bunch of strategic minerals, and they're all in different places. But some of the key ones are in China. China holds some of these key materials that are important in like defense production and things like that, like hypersonics and stuff like that. There's some key materials that are concentrated in places like China, although are also being found sort of elsewhere in the world. So those sort of points will become key points for competition. I think there's others that are concentrated in places like Africa. So the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, is really going to become a frontier for a lot of this competition. So there's some of these like frontier markets, but there's also some of these allied markets, like Australia is a major supplier of major metals and minerals, and they're facing a different threat, right? Like where in the DRC, it's about like capture off that. Like these Chinese concessions, Chinese companies coming in to kind of scoop all of this up, corrupt the government, control these supply chains. In places like Australia, it's more like infiltration. It's disguised attempts at like mergers and acquisitions, where the beneficial owner several steps down is like a Chinese state-owned enterprise. Like they had that happen with like Darwin Port, for example. A key strategic resource that was bought by Chinese companies. So it's more like infiltration. So again, critical minerals, I think, is one of several, but I think an important frontier of this competition. And I think mapping out things like what we do, mapping out these supply chains, understanding kind of the risks attendant with their extraction, all of this, I think is critical like decision data that's going to be needed to understand what policy needs to evolve.
Hmm.
I think the other two, just very quickly, I'd kind of mention would be spyware or the
Mm.
growth of like digital repression tools. Again, not to tie all this back to China. I mean, there's a lot of other countries that are major players in this as well. But like there is kind of like a coalition of adversaries starting to kind of build around the world, or a coalition of, I don't want to use like, or, rogue actors, whatever you want to kind of call them, or
Yeah.
repressive states, dictatorships that are all starting to coalesce around technology.
Mm.
All of their, to come back to the thing of, the South Sudanese CIA watching the corporate registry. Um, it's kind of the same thing, like the digital technology tools that they're using to monitor, to repress, to investigate their populations are often stemming out of these same companies and same places from places like China. So I think the growth of this has like really like major implications for like global human rights, for the safety and freedom of Americans to travel and all of that. So spyware and digital repression tools, I think, is something that I certainly am keeping close attention to. And then the third one is just one that's always close to my heart, is like the wildlife kind of work. Not to put too fine a point on it, but there was a point in 2013 where just for like elephants, we all love elephants. It was something like poaching and trafficking was decimating is the word. Was killing something like 10% of like global population herds like annually. Now granted that was like the peak of that crisis, but just think about that, right? Like 10% population reductions kind of happening year on year on year. That's like that's catastrophic, right? That's not even a genocide. That's on like a different level. So like when we're talking about wildlife in these populations and these habitats we want to protect, I think people forget again that the reasons that these are under threat is not just population growth and all of that, is because trafficking has become a business. Like the trade in ivory is a business. It is a multi-billion-dollar business that creates incentives for guys on the ground to be paid a dollar a day to go out and shoot an elephant, right? So again, I think things like wildlife have like a really important role to play in this illicit finance system that we're trying to build. And I think we as a community have a really important role to play in it. So critical minerals, spyware, and wildlife. And that's what the gun you just put to my head, because I got like 10 more after that.
Well, I mean, there's much more. You all are doing so much, and I hope folks can actually track and follow what you all are doing. Where should people go to learn more about all your stuff?
Yeah. I think go to the website more than anything else. There's a good amount of work kind of on the website, www.c4ads.org. Go check out some of the reports, go check out things like that. It'll give you a sense of what we're doing. But then I think most importantly, like reach out. info@c4ads.org. If you send the message there, like we will read it, we will respond to it. If you don't know who to reach out to in the organization, that's the easiest place to kind of go. And again, we're talking to, everybody who watches and listens to your podcast, Yaya, from the companies that they represent to the campaigns that they're trying to run. Reach out. We're covering like 40 different issue areas at this point. It's very, very likely that we're doing something or the other that is directly relevant to your business or to your issue area, and we want to partner. I think I didn't talk about this as much as I probably would have liked to, but at the core of C4ADS is this idea that we want to partner, we want to
Mm.
share. We cannot create this change we want to create alone. There's a limit. There'll always be a limit to the amount of investigations we can do, or whatever else we can kind of run by ourselves. So at the heart of
Mm.
C4ADS is democratizing this stuff. Everything we've built, we want to share with other people. We want to give you that capability, that knowledge, that data, whatever else that we've kind of collected, so that you all, whether you're representing a bank or you're representing a government or you're representing a media organization, so that you all can take this capability and can help us scale it. Because at the end of the day, if we want impact, we call it like ecosystem impact, like global, scalable, sustainable impact, it can't be one organization or others. It has to be kind of a community. And so that's why we don't just produce products. We try to bring people, bring communities together and supercharge them to be able to do this. So that's a very long-winded way of saying, please reach out.
Speaking with Varun Vira fortifies the notion that the world of illicit finance investigations no longer belongs solely to the U.S. government. With technology, creativity, and some tenacity, small nonprofit organizations like C4ADS can tap into hard to reach business registries and real estate records to uncover financial links that are often hiding in plain sight. And Varun's examples show that such investigations really do make a significant and material impact. The targets of these types of investigations are taking notice, and the type of analytic work exemplified by Varun has become more necessary than ever in the effort to combat illicit networks. And it all comes with tremendous risk. Financial crime fighters come in many forms. They're not all holding a gun and a badge. Some, like Varun and his colleagues at C4ADS, are equipped with tools attached to a keyboard. I salute them for their increasingly important work. I'm Yaya Jata Fanusie, and this is Designated on the Illicit Edge Network.